Emily arrived at the old hotel on the outskirts of town, craving a night of peace and solitude. The hotel, worn by time, had an eerie atmosphere that unsettled most visitors, especially room 213. But Emily wasn't swayed by rumors of strange occurrences. Ghost stories weren't going to scare her off. The moment she entered room 213, though, a strange chill greeted her. The air was thick, stale. The room was dim, with dust covering the heavy drapes. The bed was old, with fraying linens, and a tall, antique wardrobe loomed ominously in the corner. There was something unsettling about the room, but Emily dismissed it as fatigue. She tossed her suitcase on the bed and began to unpack. As the night wore on, the hotel grew unnervingly quiet. Emily climbed into bed, hoping for a good night's sleep. But just as her eyes began to close, a loud thud startled her awake. Her heart pounded as she listened intently. It sounded as if something heavy had fallen outside her door. Curious, Emily cautiously opened the door and peeked into the hallway. No one was around. She shook her head and closed the door, returning to bed, convincing herself it was just the building settling. But the unease lingered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, and the whispers began. Soft at first, like a distant conversation. A shadow, barely visible in the dim light, seemed to move inside it. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the wardrobe, her mind racing. Had she imagined it? Summoning her courage, Emily grabbed her phone for light and approached the wardrobe. Every step felt heavier, as though the air had thickened around her. Her hand shook as she reached for the wardrobe's handle. Suddenly, the door burst open with a violent crash. A freezing gust of air rushed out, and her phone's light flickered out. In the darkness, she could feel it. Something was in the room with her. The whispers grew louder, forming an unintelligible chorus of voices. Emily's body froze in terror, and the room grew impossibly cold. From the corner of the room, the figure emerged. Tall, thin, and inhuman, its shadowy form moved slowly toward her, each step deliberate, savoring her fear. Emily wanted to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed. The figure stopped at the foot of her bed, its hollow eyes fixed on her. A voice, cold and distant, echoed in her mind. "You should not have come." The temperature in the room plummeted further, and Emily's breath turned to mist. The figure's skeletal hand raised slowly and pointed at her. She struggled to move, but an unseen force held her in place. Panic surged through her as she realized there was no escape. Desperately, Emily squeezed her eyes shut, willing the nightmare to end. When she opened them again, the figure was gone. Had it all been in her head? She stood up shakily, determined to leave the room. But as she reached for the door, she glanced at the mirror on the wall. There, reflected behind her, was the figure, tall, twisted, and watching her with hollow eyes. Emily screamed, and everything went black. The next morning, the staff found room 213 empty, as though no one had ever been there. Emily's belongings remained neatly packed, and her bed undisturbed. The hotel couldn't explain her disappearance. In the weeks that followed, guests staying in room 213 reported feeling watched, and some even claimed to hear whispers in the night. A shadowy figure, always just out of sight, haunted their stay. Some say Emily's spirit never left room 213. She is part of the haunting now, trapped forever in the darkness with the figure that claimed her. Those who enter room 213 still hear her voice, faint and desperate, carried by the cold wind. "You should not have come."